4 of our tools for a smooth running school year. I hope you're enjoying it. Day 1 was Monday. We talked with Michael Larson about teens and how to connect with your teens and reestablish a good relationship. Day 2, we talked about how to stay calm, like during the storm. Day 3, we talked about how to get out the door easily, smoothly, without the conflict and chaos. And then today, this is going to be really juicy with Kelly Hutcheson. We're going to talk about the inner child work, why we get triggered, what we can do about those triggers, and get back to harmonious living, which is what we all want, just harmony in the home, right? That's our favorite phrase, right, Kelly? Harmony.
Yep, for sure.
So my name is Dale Cure, and I love helping families create health and harmony using holistic mental wellness solutions. And I'm going to talk about that later on. But I have Kelly Hutcheson with me today. She has a master's in child psychology. She's a certified life coach. She's a behavior specialist, a teacher, and a mom of 2. So she is just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for sharing this today. So I know that parents commonly talk about the child triggering them. So what's that all about, and what can we do about it?
I'm so thankful you're asked, because I had so much experience working in the schools with really severe behavior problems. And I had kids throwing chairs at me, spitting at me. I mean, you name it, I can claim it, because they did it to me as a teacher, as a counselor, as an administrator, as a behavior specialist. And so I saw so many behaviors in the schools, but I was always pretty calm. I was always very like, this child needs some support. We need to get interventions for him or her, and let's have all hands on deck. So then I thought parenting was going to be relatively easier for me, because I had so much experience with so many severe behavior problems, and I could run a classroom, and I could do time management and all the things. Well, little did I know that once I became a mom, I was struggling, and I was struggling hard. For the first 5 years of my parenting journey, I was snappy, I was terse, I was walking on eggshells, and I always blamed the kids. I'm like, if they would just listen, or if they would just behave, or they would just stop crying, or if they would stop being angry, or they would. I had one child who was throwing explosive tantrums, and then I had another one who was crying all the time. No one loves me, and just like pouting. And so I was so confused and so just so baffled by the fact that at school, I could be super calm, loving, completely calm in their storm. And then at home, I turned into a crazy lady. I wasn't the same person. It wasn't even in the same ballpark. So I thought, well, it can't be me, because I'm the one that all the experience, and I have the degrees, and I've read all the books. It has to be my kids. So then I went on this journey to find out what was wrong with my kids, because I knew if I had a diagnosis, if I had a label, if I had a pill, if I had something to fix them because something was broken within them, then I could stop all of this chaos. Because our home was like walking on eggshells. We were all walking on eggshells. I would get upset because my daughter would make me upset. And then my husband would get upset defending me because you're making your mom upset. And then my son would just cry because of all the energy in the home. And I couldn't figure it out until I read the book, The Conscious Parent by Dr. Shefali. And what she talks about there is the ego, and how we all have the ego, the inner child, the monkey mind, the primitive part of the brain. It's called a lot of different things, but it all it all comes down to the same thing. The ego, the inner child, the little girl in us, the little boy in us is very scared of failing at this parenting journey. So when we went through, we struggled a lot to have babies, because we had infertility issues. We did in vitro. It worked. It didn't work. We had miscarriages. So when I finally became a mom, I remember holding my daughter. She was my firstborn. And I remember whispering to my head, like, you can't mess this up. You put this family through, because it was quote unquote my fault that we couldn't get pregnant. So you put this family through so much turmoil trying to get pregnant, and financial loss and all the things, even though nobody put that, bearing that burden on me, I carried it on my own. So I remember holding her in the hospital going, you can't mess this up. So then I went on this journey to try to become a perfect mom. And that failed miserably. I fell on my face every single day because I was so afraid of messing up the parenting journey. So I was parenting from this fear-based place. And ironically, that's where I was messing it up. And so the ego and the fear and the little girl and all, it lives inside of all of us. But when we step into emotional adulthood, we can realize that that little girl still resides within us. And we don't always have to feed the beast, so to speak, or feed the fear, and just allow it to come up. And our children's behavior is not a reflection of us. And that's where I was missing so much, because when my students at school would be upset or act out, I made it mean nothing about me. I remember saying, this child is really struggling. He or she needs to help. And so when I was at home, I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm a bad mom. People are looking at me. People think I'm a bad, like that was my biggest fear. People are on to me. And so now I help parents to see their child as having a hard time versus giving them a hard time. Because at school, I could see that. At home, I could not. And so when you see it that way, you're like, oh, this is a lesson that the child needs to learn. The child doesn't know how to manage their anger. I haven't taught that because I've been screaming at them. This child doesn't know how to manage their tricky emotions. So when we come from that place, just like my son's in 5th grade and he's learning, double-digit multiplication, triple-digit multiplication, I'm not going to go and say, Grady, here's an algebra problem. Here's pre-algebra that's, for an 8th or 9th grader, and go solve that without giving any strategies. There's stepping stones to get to pre-algebra. So he's doing the triple-digit multiplication to set him up for that. So when we think of it, like if we're trying to teach our kids anything, we have to show them, we have to teach them, we have to model it, we have to do small groups, we have to do, we have to do it one-on-one. The same way that we teach reading is the same way we teach our kids how to manage the tricky emotions. But when we don't know that, we are very upset that they're upset, and we see their child as giving us a hard time versus having a hard time.
Wow. 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 I mean,
it's a huge mindset shift.
Yeah, it's huge. But if you get it, I mean, and I keep thinking to myself, like, how profound that must have been for you to be like, I can totally manage like 20 kids. Like, I don't have a problem at all. There's no emotion. I don't get upset. I stay calm. I mean, the kid feeds off of that. So then you go home and you're like lost in the sauce. So for you to make that connection is like so huge. So how would you like guide someone? Like, how would you counsel someone to kind of look at it that way? And I know it is a mind shift, like what you just said. They're not pushing my buttons. They're like, how would you shift that thought?
Well, I always thought my kids pushed my buttons. If they would stop pushing my buttons, then I could chill out a little bit. It was my reasoning for 5 years. It wasn't like just a phase. It was ongoing. I remember crying to my husband going, there's something they need that I can't give them. I'm not able to offer to them. And all of a sudden I had this eureka moment in the room next door. And I was like, wait a minute, if I'm the problem, then I'm the solution. I was never teaching them these skills and these strategies. And it became so empowering. Like, if I'm yelling at them for 940 Saturdays from the time they're born to the time they're grown and flown, that's how many Saturdays they're in our home, then they are going to go into their adult and young adult relationships thinking that yelling is connected to love. Yelling is what I should expect. Yelling feels familiar. Even though it doesn't feel good, it will feel familiar because that's how we, for the 940 Saturdays, that became normal. Just like I don't want that. And so I want to create the opposite arena. So then when they get into a young adult or adult relationships and there is yelling, there is screaming, God forbid, punching walls or anything like that, I want that to feel so unfamiliar to them that they will exit stage left immediately, knowing this is a toxic relationship. If you've ever been in a relationship or you've ever had a friend that stays and you're like, why are you staying? He treats you horribly or she treats you horribly. The reason why they stay is not because it feels good. The reason why they stay is because it feels very familiar. Yeah. It's like, that saying, I feel like I've known you all my life. That is exactly what it's called imagotherapy, how we're drawn towards someone who's going to try to heal our old wounds in current time. So everybody has wounds, everybody has pain, everybody has trauma from the past. But what happens is we bring those traumas and that pain and that stress into our current relationships. And unconsciously, we expect our spouse and our kids, the most vulnerable relationship we're going to have, to heal that old wound in current time. So I had a lot of infertility insecurities. I had a lot of pain from that. So I carried it into my relationship with my kids to make me feel like I was a whole person, WHOLE, versus fill my HOLES and make me feel like a whole person. That whole saying, you complete me, that comes from Jerry Maguire. We do a lot of that with our spouse, our kids. And we try to recreate that environment that we grew up in, or the pain or the trauma, because the brain doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. It's always trying to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and be efficient. So when it sees something, it creates this old pain, and it doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. It recreates that in our relationships. And then it says, well, I couldn't get you to, let's say it was a dad that wasn't there. I couldn't get you to show up for me, Dad. So now I'm going to find a husband who's a workaholic, and I'm going to make him show up more for me because that feels familiar. And it's always trying to heal that old wound in current time. When we know this, we can leave our Samsonite luggage and our baggage at the door, not disavow it, but we don't bring it into the relationships. Just like when I was a teacher and counselor, I brought no baggage into that relationship. It was a brand new relationship. I had 180 days with these kids. I was like, let's rock it out. the best way I could get my kids' reading scores in the schools to skyrocket was to make them feel safe, make them feel loved. And the first day of every single school year, I would say, boys and girls, my name is Miss Stout or Miss Hutcheson, depending on after I was married. And I am a very nice teacher and I will never yell at you. I just want you to know that you're safe and loved in this room. And you could hear a collective sigh in the hearts of these little first graders because they're like, oh, okay. And that shows them unconditional love. And then in that space where they feel safe is where they're going to thrive and flourish. The same thing works within our four walls. When we create these four walls of just peace and tranquility and safety, kids will kind of come out a little bit more versus what I wanted my kids is I wanted them to be happy all the time. If they were happy, then that meant I was doing a good job as a mom. What was happening is I had one child who was like trying to hold a beach ball underneath water. Brooke Castillo talks about holding that beach ball underneath water. And that pressure of being happy all the time, because she couldn't be happy all the time, was causing so much pressure for her that she was walking on eggshells. Then I had another child who was just a people pleaser, like, I don't care what you say, I will do. And then he couldn't think for himself. So I had both ends of the spectrum. I had one who was crying all day and super, what we would label as strong-willed. And then I had another one who was super passive and just goes with the flow because he didn't want to rock the boat. Neither are like what you want, because I want the one to stand up for himself and not be a doormat. And then I want the other one to kind of chill out a little bit. So once I was able to meet in the middle and realize I need to teach them what to do when they have sad feelings, frustration, disappointment, and connect over that. Like if I were to call you and say, I've had a really tough day, I'm really stressed out. And you're like, oh, get over it. Act your age. You're acting like a baby. You're going to start to gaslight me that okay, I'm having an emotion, but I'm going to my friend to connect over this emotion. Like, yeah, I know how you feel. This is what I do. This is something that helps me. That is so connecting. And when you have connection with your kids, you will have cooperation. I was doing the opposite. I was like, be happy, use your manners out in public. Don't cling on my leg. Go out into the world, even though you're introverted, be extroverted. I was wanting all these things for them, but I wasn't showing them any skills whatsoever. It's like giving my son, who's in 5th grade, a chemistry book and saying, go figure it out, but not giving him any reading strategies of how to read the book. He's going to go to his room. And that's why I felt like I was on the crazy cycle, because I wasn't teaching my kids what to do when they're having big emotions. I was teaching them that something has gone wrong. Go to timeout, leave me alone, go to your room. And then they're sitting in guilt and shame. And they're like, okay, this is bad. I shouldn't feel this feeling. And then they don't know how to like suppress it and repress it. So they're like they were like this all the time versus like, oh, I know how that feels. This is what helps me. What helps you? And then we kind of connect over that. And through that connection is where you're going to get more cooperation.
Yeah. Woo. Boy, oh boy, that was a mouthful.
I know. It's a huge transition.
No, I mean, but it's so powerful. It's like, the modeling, just like the whole idea that parents always think that kids have to be happy all the time. Like that's not reality. That's not reality. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with them if they are sad. And if we can teach them, I mean, this is so important for young kids because look at our team right now. Our team is in really huge trouble. You know what I mean? For many,
I feel like we add so much guilt and shame around these tricky emotions. So some kids can suppress and repress, which you don't want to teach. And some kids act out even more. What happens over time is they grow up and they're 22, 32, 42, and they have these human emotions that are part of the human experience. And they have not been taught anything other than you shouldn't feel this way. That's why you went to timeout those 452 times, because you had a tricky emotion. So what happens when we're 22, 32, 42, and we have these tricky emotions? We put ourselves in an adult timeout. That's why people eat their feelings, they smoke their feelings, they Facebook their feelings, they shop their feelings, because we're not ever taught that this is part of the human experience. And most of your life, it's going to be 50-50, where it's going to be a lot of yummy, good feelings, and then it's going to be the tricky ones. I don't even like to call them negative, but when we normalize that for our kids and we say, I'm 46 and I have these emotions every single stinking honking day, then they're like, oh, they see us as an ally versus it's me against them. I gotta hide, I gotta protect. Versus like before, when I was going to soccer games, this is something I always remember. I'd go to soccer games as a kid and I'd say, I am so nervous, Dad. I'm just like, he's like, he goes, it means a lot that you're nervous. That means you care about your team. And thinking back, what he was doing was normalizing nervous. What we do when a kid's nervous, don't be nervous. You're fine. You played great against this team last time. We try to talk them out of their feelings versus connecting like, this means that you really care about your team. I felt nervous too before. When someone says, I know how you feel, I felt that too, there is nothing more connective than that. So when you have that connected energy with your child, they don't have this fight or flight where it's you against them. It's more you with them. And then they put down their guard. Your strong-willed kids, they will put down their guard because there's no rope to tug anymore. When my kids are mad at me, I'm like, I know, I get mad at myself sometimes. I just completely agree with the emotion. Our goal is to change the behavior, but not to ever change the emotion. And in that process, we can teach them skills of what to do when you're feeling the tricky emotions. But when we're never teaching them, then it's why you feel like you're on Groundhog's Day and it's going to repeat on the crazy cycle, which I was on for 5 years.
Wow. It's so transformative when you get that. I mean,
it really is.
Even our teens, like that's all they want is connection. Like that's what every human being wants. And like you say, once you're connected, then there's least resistance. There's no resistance. And then modeling that behavior and sharing, like you said, I tell my kids, yeah, I was anxious too, or yeah, I was, sad. This is how I've dealt with it. And this is a normal emotion. Like this is life. Like I think that, it's so crazy, the helicopter parents, right? We've talked about that before, where they come in and try to make everything perfect, but that's not reality. And we're not setting them up to live a life where they feel like they have control. They can control themselves. They can, they have some say in the way their life is and the way they feel. And they have the tools to deal with those tricky emotions, as you call it.
Right.
So share with us. Oh, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just like, when I was teaching this is such a good analogy, and this really clicks for a lot of parents, is that when I was teaching reading in first grade, and just like if you ever taught a child how to read, tie their shoes, potty train, any skill that you've taught them, there's so much you show them, then you do it with them, and then they practice on their own. And when I was teaching reading in the classroom, that's the same thing I would do. I would show them by modeling. We'd sit on the rug. We'd all read a big book. Some of them, it was too hard. Some of it was too easy, the book. But we talk about reading strategies. What do you do when you get to a word you don't know? Do you use picture clues? Do you sound it out? Do you use context clues? What are some strategies whole group I'm teaching them? I'm showing them. Then I would go with them and I'd work in a small group. I get them a book that's called their Goldilocks book. It's not too hard, not too easy. They're just right books. And then we'd read the books together, and then we talk about more strategies. What do you do when you get to a word you don't know? And then they tell me what they do. I'm like, oh, this is what Johnny uses. He likes to sound it out. This person likes to use chunking, where we break it into smaller parts. So I'm learning about what they do, and then they're also teaching each other in the small group. And then they would go to their rooms, they're somewhere in the room, and they would read independently from their books of Goldilocks books. So when you think about how they were able to excel as readers, we can do the same thing with our kids with their emotions. How are we teaching in the large group? What do they do when mom gets cut off on the freeway? What does mom do when she drops the dish? What does mom do when she's frustrated with her brother, with my brother? What does mom do when she's frustrated with my sister? These are what kids are seeing. They're seeing it all day long, the modeling. What does mom do when she feels stressed? What does mom do when she feels frustrated? Is she a yeller? Then that means that I need to do that when I'm yelling. Is she a crier? Then that means I need to do that when I'm upset. So then we teach them in the modeling with the pros and the cons, and then we teach them the examples and non-examples. We also can teach them in small group when they're having those meltdowns. We get them out of the red zone. I pretend like they're in a burning building. We don't do any teaching, we just completely try to get them out of the red zone, where the red is like when they're super hot or they're super cold, where they're just like on fire and they're just so mad or they're so sad. We bring them down to yellow, where they're just kind of like catching their breath again. And then once they're in the green zone, then we can have a rational talk like, hey, what happened? Let's rewind. Let's role play this if they're younger with stuffed animals. I felt that way too before. This is what helped me. Then we can have like a rational conversation. When they're in the yellow and red zone, it's like talking to someone who's had too much to drink. If you've ever talked to someone who's drunk, it leads nowhere. And a lot of times that's when they get in trouble. That's when they get consequences. And then the consequences just keep getting bigger and bigger because they're not in their higher part of their brain. And then another way to teach them is they're going to learn independently. What do they do when they strike out? They're going to have so many skills in their toolbox and so many tools of sound it out, chunk it, all those things we teach with reading. You're going to teach them all those different skills and all those different strategies. So they have them almost like in a fanny pack, and they can pull it out. Because what my son does is very different than what my daughter does. My son needs more support and more help. My daughter likes to be alone and kind of do it on her own versus go to your room and figure it out. She's like, I'm going to go to my room and figure it out. Or I might say, do you need help calming down, or do you want to calm down by yourself? Or if they're in the red zone, you might say something like, I'm staying calm to help you stay calm. And then when they're in the green, that's when you're talking to your child again, not someone they're literally drunk on emotion and they don't know what to do. Then they're getting in trouble. So it's compounding this. Like if you were to call me and say I had a bad day and then you're getting in trouble for it, you're going to even be more upset because it's like gas on the fire. So I teach parents how to be the diffuser versus throwing gas in the fire, which I used to do. And now I'm doing the opposite. And my daughter literally defines her life into two parts: is life before conscious parenting as awful and so stressful, and life after conscious parenting is like very chill, relaxed, and just more peace. And she's 13 now. So I found it when she was around 5, and she's a completely different child, and our relationship is completely different, because this was us all day long before. And now we still have this, but it's more like this. And these are few and far. What happens when you start doing this, the goal isn't always to make the emotions go away and the tantrums, and that is never the goal, because we want to normalize human emotions as much as we can. It's like our literacy lab. We want them to happen so they know that, number one, it's safe. Nothing has gone wrong. And then that's a great chance to teach them strategies so they can bring them when they're grown and flown.
Wow. So good. So tell us, I mean, we could talk forever and ever, but I try to keep this a little bit short.
Obsessed with this topic.
Tell us about your resources and how you coach and what services and what groups you have available for people to go and learn more.
Well, I find that, a lot of dads are get overwhelmed. I have a Facebook group every month that I run, Parenting Boot Camp. It's completely free. It's just such a labor of love because I love helping parents. A lot of times the dads get a little overwhelmed with all the estrogen. There's a lot of females within the group. So I have a podcast too called Harmony in the Home. And a lot of dads like to listen to this because they can listen in the car. They can speed up my voice. They can slow down my voice because I speak a little fast. They can go back and reference it. My husband was actually on the 100th episode about how to get your husband on board, which is one of the top questions I get. I read a ton of books. So what I do on the podcast is I'm the Cliff Note version of that book. And I will take the book, I'll disseminate it, and I'll say, this is something this is how it impacted me. This is how I'm using it. This is how I've helped other parents. And now if you want to read more, you can read this book, or you can just hear the Cliff Notes. So it's 120 episodes. I'm obsessed with personal development in this space because I struggled so much. And so when you're struggling, that's when you're so desperate for information and desperate for change. And so pain is the greatest portal for growth. I know if I would have had an easier 5 years, I would have never found any of this work and not changed our lives so dramatically that it's like you can literally taste the difference in our home, that now paying it forward is all that I want to do. So you can find me on Facebook in a Parenting Boot Camp, or you can listen to the podcast called Harmony in the Home on all the players.
And what is the name of your group?
It depends on the month. It's blank, whatever the month is, the Parenting Boot Camp 2021. So the month is always different, and then the year is different. But I've been running those since 2014, and literally every single, I ask, what do you struggle with the most? What's the greatest thing about about parenting? And what's your email if you want to include on the, to hear the next podcast? And number one answer is, Kelly, I love my kids more than life itself, but I can't stop yelling, and I have so much mommy guilt, and I sleep every night with it. Please make it stop. And I only know that I slept with that same mommy guilt. So I am on a mission until I'm 99 to help other parents not sleep with so much mommy guilt.
Love it. I love it. I love it. I mean, change is possible. It doesn't have to be this hard. Resources are available. Grab it, get a hold of it. Because how different your life would be. I would love to hear your daughter talk. Like your 13.
Oh yeah. She won't sugarcoat it. I don't have easy kids. I think that's one thing that people think, that like, oh, you must have really easy kids and my kids are harder, or you must be a unicorn, Kelly, because I'm not a unicorn like you. That is the number one way the brain doesn't want to change. The brain likes to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and be efficient. So it's very normal to think that I have unicorn kids or I'm a unicorn. And I am here to tell you, my kids are just like every other child. And I don't want them to be any different. They're not any better, any less. We are all the same. And I've taught at so many different schools. And one thing I can say for sure is kids are kids are kids are kids. No matter where you go, I've taught at so many schools and all different grade levels. No matter what, all kids want that connection. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be loved. They want to feel safe. And if they can't feel safe within their four walls, and yelling doesn't usually beget safety. And so when you have that, you have one child who will get super compliant, and you have another child who gets super strong-willed and get actually louder. So I have both. Sometimes you have all three that are, one or the other. So just know that that's normal. And that is literally your lesson. And that is your breadcrumb to find out more information, that it's very, very possible for change. If I can do it, then anybody can.
Love it. I love it. Well, Tracy joined us, and she's like, pain is the greatest portal for growth. I agree, Tracy. That's
Dr. Shefali. Yep.
So great. I love Dr. Shefali too. And I think that's how we connected on it. This was amazing. Like I said, we could go on and on and on, but check out the podcast, Harmony in the Home. And you said 120 you've done, or that's the episode that goes more into trigger?
Oh, we're on episode 121, something like that. So that's chock full of information about inner child work, having a happier marriage, introvert versus extroverted child, your love languages. I could go on and on. It's literally just a labor of love to pay it forward, because I am so thankful for this work. Because I'm thinking now, if I would have had a 13-year-old and doing the path that I was on when she was 5 and below, we would be probably living in separate homes, like within the same home, but feeling like we're in separate homes, living within the same 4 walls. And they couldn't be further from the truth. Our relationship was so strained and so fractured and so filled with angst, and it's literally completely gone. So if I can do this, then anybody can do this.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want that? You just have to do the work. Seek and you shall find. You will.
It's very hard work, but on the other side, it's so worth it.
So worth it. All right. Fantastic, Kelly. Thank you so very much. This was amazing. I'm going to listen to it again and again as well.